Well, welcome to the second week of our series, My Big Fat Mouth, and I'm just so excited to be continuing this conversation with you today. And if you're new with us, I want to welcome you and thank you so much for being a part of our services. And I also want to challenge you to make this a habit for the next 3 weeks together. And we do our sermons in series so we can go really deeply into a specific idea, topic, or passage of Scripture. And I just really think the best things in life have a cumulative value. So if you try it once, it'll be okay. But if you apply it to your life many times, you'll experience big reward. And the foundation of this series has been this statement, from the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And I think this is something that's going to come with us for the rest of the series. Jesus cares much more about the heart behind our words than the actual words themselves. And he wants us to speak from a heart that loves and values people. And last week, that was the foundation that we laid, but we're going to bring that with us this week as we talk about the intensely important subject of criticism. And at its core, I think criticism is showing somebody a better way. And criticism, to me, is a really big deal. It's lovingly helping somebody become better at their life and helping them see more clearly God's plan for their life. Criticism is a critical part of our lives. And I'm going to talk about how a bad heart can destroy good criticism and how a good heart can make criticism great in our lives. And what I'm going to teach you is probably one of the most powerful tools for self-improvement. You show me somebody who is an effective person, I'll show you somebody who is really good at criticism. And I'm titling this message, How to Harness the Secret Power of Criticism. And I think the most important question to ask when it comes to criticizing somebody or receiving criticism from somebody else is a question, why? Understanding the why behind all of our actions is sort of a blueprint to so much of our lives. I think understanding why allows us to understand where we're going and how to get there. Why is so critical. Without a why in life, I think there's a lot of wasted time, guesswork, and mistakes. Have you ever been a part of a committee or a meeting where there wasn't a clear understanding of the why? I'm currently a part of a committee where we don't really have a clear why. We don't have a clear leader. Every time we get together, we sort of just spin our wheels and we waste time arguing with each other because everybody has their own different agenda and their own different conception of what why is. And we always leave not feeling heard and not having heard anyone else. This is actually what we call marriage. No, just kidding. Although marriage can occasionally feel like this. You always have to understand the end game. You have to understand the why. And I want to start by asking you this simple question. Have you ever built something from IKEA? You know, IKEA-style furniture. I think it's just the worst. If there's something that makes me immediately want to die or consider suicide as an option in my life, or even question God's love for me, I would say that building IKEA furniture is right up there. Some of the directions are just hilarious but frustrating because they're translated from Swedish to English. Kristen always knows, if I'm building IKEA furniture, she just says, "Children, don't talk to your father right now. He's wrestling with his faith. He's really working through some things." And it's so precise. Like, the thing about IKEA furniture is it's so cheap. They don't put Formica on both sides of the shelf. I mean, this side of the shelf has, white on it, but this side doesn't. And what always happens is I put the furniture together and I make the mistake, and it's just a simple mistake of putting the wrong side facing out, right? And you're like, oh, we're going to be good. Wrong. Because as soon as you push those pegs together, God's sovereign will has spoken. There's no turning back. You can't turn back, right? Kristen will look at it and she'll say, "Oh, honey, I think I'm like, "I know." She's like, "Can you change it?" It's like, no, it wasn't a part of God's plan, honey. Like, I'm a pastor. You got to listen. God has spoken. We can't change it. It's just God's sovereign. He chose. My family will always order like 3 of these pieces at once, okay? We'll order 3 separate pieces to like redo a room or when we move into a new house. And what happens is you always go to the IKEA store. You walk through it, and you're like, this is amazing. They take care of my kids, and they feed me cheap food, and they have, like, moving sidewalks. I love it. And you look at all the rooms. You're like, wow, that looks great. I want that, right? But I have news for you. You will never have that. Because even if you get all the furniture, your house just won't look like that. That's just not how it works. The rooms are proportioned. The colors are perfect. It doesn't work that way. And we get so excited until we get to the bottom of the store where you check out and they're like, pick out this box, A13, and it's just up here, and you lift it up and you're like, oh, wow, it was very small, but it's very densely packed. It's very heavy, right? And you're like, I have a herniated disc. Please help me, somebody, okay? Now, when all the furniture arrives, I can assemble like 2, sometimes even 3 of these things. But by the time I get to like the 4th piece, and I'm in like the 8th hour of my 1 off day a week, and the peg does not fit, get a little upset, okay? I mean, I'm trying to stay calm, but sometimes the directions say something simple, like insert peg into top hole on piece number A5. And I'm like, okay, I want to do that, but the hole is not big enough, right? And I'm trying to fit the peg in the hole, and I'm like, I'm trying to follow your directions, but the hole is not large enough for this peg to fit, right? And I'm a millennial, so I need direction, I need feedback. Am I doing it right? Can somebody please tell me here? Like, I need some feedback. Getting a little angry, talking squirrel, right? I'm a pastor. From the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks, trying to control things. And what happens is I start getting rough. Have you ever been at this place where you just snap and something inside of you just breaks and you're like, get in the hole! Just, right? And now, you've gone and got the peg in the hole. The peg is in the hole. But not in a way that brings you closer to your ultimate goal. And that's the thing about life, is we have all these tasks, right? And in the microcosm of the task, sometimes you complete the task in a way that compromises your ultimate goal. The goal is to build a shelf, right? But now I've done and completed my task in a way that compromises my goal because I've destroyed the shelf. We do this all the time, don't we? I mean, you're forgetting the vision. We complete a task, but we compromise the goal. I do this in life all the time. I mean, sometimes I get washed up in this task and I get focused on this task, but there's a greater goal, like getting my kids ready for school. Can I get a testimony here? Like this is a trying time, right? And the task is to get the kids out of their beds, to get food in their mouths, and to get them out the door with clothing on. I don't care if they're clean. I just want them out the door. Get in the car. Get in the car. Okay? And I'm just repeating myself, and I'm like, everybody calm down, okay? Everybody stop yelling, right, is what I do. And we forget that we're not just getting kids ready for school, we're getting them ready for life, right? I mean, the task is getting them ready for school, but the goal is getting them ready for life. Sometimes I forget that this isn't just a temper tantrum, this is a training opportunity in a larger picture, right? I mean, who's having a temper tantrum, me or them, right? We forget that this is not just a day, that this is a gift of time and an oh-so-short lifespan. See, there's always tasks, but it's so important to see that task in the context of the greater goal. This is so important when giving criticism, because I think that giving criticism is a lot like building IKEA furniture. I mean, it requires patience, it requires vision, it requires understanding, and it requires great care. I think so often what we do is we start giving criticism like it's a task, forgetting that it's a piece of a bigger puzzle. It's a part of a bigger story. I think most people go into criticism with great expectations. We say, I'm going to give them this tip. They're going to receive it. They're going to be like, thank you. You're so insightful. And you're like, yeah, no, but I am. Yes, hug it out, bro. Like, it's all good, right? And then you get into the moment. And what I typically do is I try my very best to take a lot of short, fast breaths so that I'm seeing black spots and hyperventilating, okay? And then I take the long rehearsed phrase, like I'm going to say it this way. And in my mind, it's eloquent. It's perfect. I've composed it. And then they're going to respond like this, and then I'm going to say this, and then they'll respond like that, and it's all perfect, right? So, like, I say what I'm going to say, except way worse than I planned on saying it, and then they say something, and it's like, but that wasn't in the directions, okay? That's not how. Can you just say what I think you were going to say, what I think you meant to say? Can you just say it like this? No, you can't? Okay, now it's over, right? What happens is you're like, the peg didn't fit in the hole like I thought it would. I just want the peg to get in the hole. Why don't you see it the way I see it? Okay, and you just start hammering on their heart, and you just start criticizing and yelling because you don't understand what I'm trying to tell you, right? And all of a sudden you realize this didn't work out like I hope it would, right? I think so many of us have driven the peg of criticism deep into somebody's heart, and we've accomplished the task, but we've compromised the goal. Because at the end of the day, criticism is showing somebody and helping them walk into a better way of life. I think so many of us have been criticized in this way, or we have criticized in a way that wasn't our best, and we end up fearing it and hating it. The thing about IKEA furniture, though, is that when it's actually put together, it's actually really nice. I mean, it has great value, and it's functional, right? I mean, it's frustrating to put it all together, but once you get it together, it's like, wow, that was 10 times cheaper, and it's not 10 times worse. It is worse, but it's not 10 times, right? The same is true of good criticism. It produces really nice results. It's very functional, and it has great value because you stop making the same mistake over again. It's good. It's good. Today, I want to teach you how to criticize effectively and biblically. Good criticism, to me, begins in the heart. And like all things, from the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Good criticism from good hearts is very effective, but criticism from a bad heart is often destructive and ineffective. The story we're going to look at today is from Luke chapter 18, starting at verse 9, going through verse 14. And Jesus is telling this thing called a parable. A parable is like, it's just a teaching fable. It's a fictitious story that you use to demonstrate a point, okay? Jesus is telling a parable about these two dudes, one of whom is really bad at criticism because he has a bad heart. And from the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. It says here, then Jesus told this story to some who had great confidence in their own righteousness, and they scorned, they criticized, they looked down on everyone else. It says two men went to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee. Pharisee's a super respected guy. He's like, business owner, super generous, community leader. Everybody wants their time. They're the kind of guy that says hi to everyone at a restaurant, and they're a deacon at their church and whatever else, okay? One was a Pharisee, and the other was a despised tax collector. I could go into the background on this, but I'll just say tax collectors were really, really super hated times a million, okay? The Pharisee stood by himself, and he prayed this prayer. I thank you, God, that I'm not like other people. Cheaters, sinners, and adulterers. I'm certainly not like that tax collector over there. I fast twice a week, and I give you 1/10 of all my income. Now, if this Pharisee talked with the tax collector about some of the tax collector's many issues, and the tax collector had many issues. If he talked with him about it, we could see that his heart's probably not in the right place. It probably wouldn't be a good idea. I mean, there's some issues with his heart. And what Jesus is trying to show us in this parable are some of the mistakes that the Pharisee makes with his heart. And that's what I want to show you guys. I want to show you 3 mistakes that are commonly made in our heart when it comes to criticism. And the first mistake that the Pharisee makes is he criticizes from a heart of competition and comparison. He's looking at the tax collector and he's saying, I thank God that I'm not like that tax collector. I thank God that I don't mess up like he does, right? And I feel like this is such a common tactic. I mean, when I was a youth pastor at this church in a wealthy suburb of Dallas, Texas, students would be like, Jesus is for impoverished people with problems. And many of us are too mature to admit it, but I actually feel like there's this part of our heart that says people with more problems need Jesus more. And that's a lie that we tell ourselves. It's actually not true. We are all, theologically, we're born with sin. We're totally depraved. To the core, we have sin in our heart. We totally fall short of God's perfect standard for our life. And we all are equally in need of God's grace by the work of Christ on the cross. And as Christians, I do believe that we have something better, but it is a gift that we receive from God. It's not something that we earn. I think a lot of times what we do is we have this sense of superiority. Why are you taking credit for something that you didn't earn? It was a gift that you received, right? It's a gift that others can receive. Why wouldn't you just help others find it rather than taking credit for something that you didn't earn? And yet so often we criticize people because we're taking credit for something that we didn't earn but we've received. Have you ever done that? You ever secretly root for a peer or family member or friend to do not better than you? It's like, I want you to do good. I just don't want you to do better than I do, right? I want you to lose weight, just not as much as I do, or not as fast as I did after I had a baby. I want you to do well, just not quite as good as I'm doing in life. I want you to make a lot. I want you to get a raise, but not as much as I make, right? That's what we do. That's a game that we play. Have you ever done that game? I've done this in my marriage. That's frustrating for me. I want you to put yourself in my shoes for a moment. I am married to a woman who is simply awesome at everything. And it's kind of frustrating, right? I mean, my wife can beat me in basketball. You know, what am I supposed to do? How can I sleep at night? My wife can beat me in a 5K. She's like close to sub 18-minute 5Ks, right? It's just like, come on. What is wrong with you? She's good at everything. Everybody likes her. And look. She spoke a full-length message a few months ago at our church for the first time she's ever done a full-length message. And I just saw incredible talent. I'm going to be honest. I've spoken thousands of times, but she had more raw talent. And I know what a good speaker is. She had more raw talent than anybody I've ever seen, including myself. And that was frustrating. It was frustrating. And I felt threatened. Usually what happens when I get done with the message is I walk off the stage and my wife meets me back there and she kisses me and she says, you did such a great job, you know? And so she gets off, she's done, we go back and instead of telling her she did a good job, I just began criticizing her out of a heart of comparison and competition. And here's what I was doing. I was like, yeah, you did good, but my shelf's better. Right? Here's all the problems with your shelf. I just want you to see how my shelf is way better than your shelf, okay? That's what I was doing. I was just kind of pointing it out. In fact, I was even sabotaging your shelf a little bit because I wanted mine to be better, right? And that's what small people do. That's what selfish, insecure, little people do. And that's what I did. That's what I did because I felt threatened by her. And I see this all the time too, right? Spouses say, well, I don't want his head to get too big, right? His head's getting a little big. I better knock him down a few pegs. I better show him. I better put him in his place, right? I see men say, oh yeah, she's got to get brought down a few pegs. She's really high and mighty right now. I better just criticize. I better just pick apart. I better just do a little bit, just to make sure that she understands I'm just better at this than he is. That's just the truth. And that might be true. That might be true. But the goal there is to build up your shelf, not theirs. It's competition and comparison. And it's not a good foundation to mount effective criticism on. If criticism is from a heart of competition and comparison, you'll forget the ultimate vision of seeing the other person become better at life. And that may include them becoming better at something than you are. And I just want you to ask yourself, as you're getting ready to criticize somebody, this is a critical question, okay? Like application question. Am I okay with this person becoming better at this task than I am? Okay? Am I okay with that? Am I okay with them becoming much better? Because if your heart is not in that place, you're not in a good place to offer criticism, because from the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. I challenge you to criticize people so that they can reach their best potential regardless of how good it is compared to your skill set. I feel like so often, instead of actually helping people be better, we're actually pointing out how somebody else is worse. And that's not effective criticism. The second mistake that the Pharisee makes is also really common. I think he criticizes from a heart of justice. You can't do that, okay? This is when you're trying to point out and humiliate somebody because there's been an injustice committed. I need the world to know. I must declare from the town square of Facebook how badly this person is messed up because I am Batman and justice will be served, right? That's what we do. You ever been cut off in line? It's like number one pet peeve of mine. Do not cut me off in line, okay? That's unjust. That's wrong. The queue is there for a reason. We're all in line. And when I used to fly a lot. I used to fly a lot for a job that I had. I was always in airports, and I was always waiting, okay? And just so you know, there's the security line. Then there's the security line for half Asian people who are traveling alone and suspicious to TSA. It's a very intimate line, okay? I wanted that one quite a bit. Then there's the third line at the gate where after they've already done all their stuff to you, you have to take off your shoes again, and they got to make sure your shoes aren't bombs, which they've already done. I don't understand why you got to do it, but they do it to me, right? Then there's waiting for food, waiting to get on the plane, waiting to get off the plane, waiting to get baggage, waiting for the taxi. It's a lot of waiting. I get frustrated because there was this lady on my team that I was traveling with, and she was just really dramatic. I don't know why, because I'm a nice guy, but she hated me. Hated, like actually hated me. What have I ever done to you? Name I will not say. Okay? She would just cut in front of me in line all the time. Everywhere we went. Didn't matter where. She just cut in front of me in line. Always. At the airport, if we were going to Starbucks, every time we're traveling to a place or to see a client, she just cut in front of me. And I'm like, hey, I'm trying to be calm, but I do want to kill you. As we were leaving the airport one day, we're at the baggage claim. And she is about to done cut in front of me in line. We already got our baggage. We're going to the taxi. I'm like, no, this isn't going to happen. So I just cut in front of her and rolled my large suitcase directly over her very sore feet as hard as I possibly could. Justice is served. And I laughed maniacally like, what you're really doing is you're asserting your dominance. You're trying to force compliance. And here's the truth. Last time I checked, God is full of love and compassion. He doesn't force us. He persuades and pursues. And it's sort of like tearing down someone's shelf on purpose, right? That's what justice is. You walk up to somebody and I say, you deserve this beating. You deserve me ruining this. I just want to destroy you, right? And you just ruin it. You blow it apart because they deserve it. Let justice be served. You brought this on yourself, right? I see this all the time on Facebook. All the time. When we were building this building, there's a Facebook page that I actually love. I enjoy it. I make fun of it all the time. But DeMont Unofficial and Original. Usually it's just a page for lost dogs, but it actually has some good stuff on it too. Anyway, somebody put a posting on it. They took a picture of our building skeleton going up, and they said, just what DeMont needs, another church. And there are some Christians who had a heart of justice. They were like, that's not true. Justice must be served. I'm Darkwing Duck, right? So then they said things, and these are quotes. Someone said, have fun burning in hell. And someone else said, people like you are what's wrong with the world today. Move back to Merrillville. And I was like, wow. Now, if there's even a minute amount of truth in those statements, in those criticisms, it's not from a heart that actually cares about the person, right? What is the goal with criticism? The goal is to lead somebody into a better life. It's not to destroy their heart and crush their soul. I just think that criticism from a heart of justice is so ineffective. It hurts the person who happens, by the way, to be created in the image of God. Whether or not they're following that God is irrelevant. They are created in the image of God and are intrinsically valuable as a human being. Let God decide whether or not at the end of days they will spend eternity with him, right? You're just hammering away at the shelf. And it brings them no closer to becoming the vision that God has for their life. I would challenge you, instead of justice, be about grace and love. Jesus did not bring justice to our lives. Jesus brought grace and love. He could have brought justice, but thank God he didn't. He brought a hope and a future. Criticism should always give people grace and a hope for the future. If you want criticism to work, it can't be about justice, and it can't be about comparison. It has to be for the love of the person and to make them better at life. The third way that the Pharisee may have failed is that I just don't think the Pharisee really cared about how sin brings pain to our life. And I think as a society today, this is something that we really struggle with. The church is sort of like a pendulum. You know, all of society is. We sort of swing back and forth to different extremes. I feel like in the 1960s, the church was like, turn or burn, sin, and you're going to hell, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, wow, that's like probably a little harsh. Now the pendulum has swung all the way over here, and it's like, love, peace, and chicken grease, your best life now, and it's all good today, and everything's good, and look. Sin to me is serious and destructive. Like, sin is not good. Sin always brings about pain in our life. Not just now, not just in eternity, but today, right? And listen, if somebody was on fire, let's just pretend that somebody was actually on fire. You would probably tell them, right? Because you love them, because you actually care about them being on fire. You'd be like, hey, I just want you to know that you are on fire, right? You wouldn't just sit there and watch them and be like, oh, yeah. They're good. You know, it's probably okay. You'd be like, hey, I want you to know because I care about you. I want you to know that you are on fire, right? Like, oh, they probably want it that way. They probably like the fire, right? They're probably okay with it. I have, what's that called? A fire extinguisher backstage. Nobody worry, right? If our insurance agent is online, this is fake fire. It's good. But you wouldn't be like, oh, yeah, it's all good. They're just a little bit on fire. They're probably fine. They probably want it that way. They're probably comfortable. No. You'd say, I want to help you put out the fire, right? That's what we would do in life. Did I get that front there? I did a little bit. Wasn't supposed to actually have a combustion point that'd be hot enough to light that on fire, but maybe it did. Science was wrong. Listen, Paul tells us in Acts 20:26, he says, I declare today that I have been faithful. If anyone suffers eternal death, it's not my fault. For I didn't shrink from declaring all that God wants you to know. See, Paul tells us that as Christians, not proclaiming the gospel is a big deal. Even though we believe in God's sovereign foreknowledge, he says, not proclaiming the gospel, knowing the truth and holding it back, leaves their spiritual eternal blood on our hands as Christians. I think a lot of times we're like, oh, it's not that big a deal. There's this myth that we believe that says, well, I don't think people really want to turn from sin. And everybody here, even if you're not a Christian, you know, if you've lived long enough in sin, that sin doesn't lead to satisfaction. Right? You tried drugs, sex, and rock and roll. You've been down that road, and it's like, my life is empty. Right? You lived the fantasy. You did everything that everybody ever talked about. It's like, wow, I really was Mick Jagger in my own life. And it doesn't lead to satisfaction because sin always leads to dissatisfaction and death. That's why God tells us not to do it, because he loves us, because he wants us to not have to experience the pain that comes with sin. Sin is fun for a little while, but it will eventually burn down your whole life. I know some of you guys have been in that situation. You know exactly what I'm talking about, right? For some of us, the affair was hot. It was. It was thrilling. It was exciting. It was bliss for a moment. But as you stand in the ashes of what was once your family, you're like, man, I wish somebody would have helped me count the cost. I wish somebody would have helped me put these flames out before it burned down everything that I love. For some of us, the high from the drugs was bliss, but it burned our whole life to the ground. Everything, even our freedom. As we stand in the ashes of what was once our life, as we look at what could have been, as we look at what once was but is now dead, we're like, man, I wish somebody would have helped me put that fire out. I wish somebody would have actually shown me how that fire was going to destroy my life. The power was intoxicating, wasn't it? The selfish power was intoxicating, but as it burned every relationship in our life to the ground, and as we stand in the ashes of what once was, you know what I'm talking about. Like, man, I wish somebody would have helped me put that fire out before it destroyed everything I love. Because sin always leads to death. I think it's hard for us to understand this in the moment, but feelings are not facts. Our sensation, our immediate pleasure, and our personal sense of morality is not the moral ultimate truth. It might feel right, but we know that biblically, and this is what I love, statistically and spiritually, sin ruins lives. Sin leads to death always. The Pharisee looked at the tax collector and he said, he probably loves his pain. He probably loves living in sin. I wouldn't want to impede on his freedom. He's got to do you, He's got to do him. And I just kind of want to respect. I don't want to make him conform to something. I don't want to, listen. There is a truth. It's greater than the ages. There's a God who loves us, who came so that we could know him. I think sometimes we think he just doesn't want to hear the truth, and that's not true. We've seen literally hundreds of people in the last 12 months within our church choose to follow Jesus as their leader and forgiver, and then express so much gratitude to you guys for sacrificing and building a community where they could hear the message of Jesus, the message of truth, and the message of salvation in a language they could understand, right? Frequently, just last night, 2 people gave their lives to Christ, right? And they just were thanking the church. Thank you, First.church, for building a community that we could be a part of to help us understand why sin was bringing misery to our lives. We were trying all the things that we thought would bring us happiness, but it didn't. Because sin leads to death. Look, criticism and love means not just being nice, but rejoicing with the truth. The Bible says love rejoices with the truth. It means caring about people enough to say hard things. Criticism means showing people a better way. And most people hate it because they've experienced it from a bad heart. But when it's done from a heart that actually loves people, it is a transformative blessing. Now, I'm going to be clear. The Hill family, the John and Kristen Hill family, we have a great deal of criticism in our marriage. We have a very open relationship, not an open relationship, but a relationship that is open when it comes to criticism. Wow, language is changing, okay? We talked about that last week. Kristen criticizes me all the time, I'm going to be honest, okay, to make me better. And I can receive it because from the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks, and she has a really good heart. She never disrespects me. She always is gentle. And she's not going for justice. She's not competing with me. I know, and I can feel and see her heart. Communicated 5 by 5, I can see that she is trying to help me become a better person. Because of that, it's easy for me to receive. I want you to know in our marriage, I criticize Kristen often from a heart that loves her, from a heart that respects her, and from a heart that wants to see her become a better person. You can't begin to criticize until your heart is in the right place, because from the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And this means these specific 3 things, okay? You can't have a heart of comparison and competition. You can't have a heart that is looking for justice. And you must love someone enough to confront sin. Once you get these 3 things in place, once and only after these 3 things are in place, you can begin to offer criticism to somebody. And I want to spend the last few minutes we have together just talking about 2 very short points on how to actually criticize somebody effectively, but only once your heart's in the right place. You can't do what I'm about to teach you until these 3 things are accomplished. Once that's done, 2 steps of good criticism. The first one is point to the future with clear, realistic application. And this is a big deal, okay? The future. Don't point to the past, okay? When my wife criticizes me, she might say, hey, John, yeah, you done messed up. Here's what you did, right? But I'm so grateful that she always points to the future. She says, even though you did this, I want you to know, I know you can overcome this. I see greatness in your future. I know that you're going to overcome this, right? I just appreciate that she's very future-oriented. She says you can do better. The second thing is you have to be clear. You have to be clear. Make your point quickly and clearly. Don't humiliate the person by beating around the bush and waxing on forever. Have you ever had your spouse confronting you and you're like, okay, please just get to the point. I will admit that I'm wrong, okay? I know you got me, okay? Just tell me what it is you want me to do. Just be clear. Get to the point. You tell me how I done messed up and I will fix it, right? And the third part is realistic application. This is such a huge deal. Give an immediate example of how they can take action today and make it realistic and within reach. It's so much easier if Kristen confronts me and she says, hey, here's how you messed up, but here's how you can fix it today. As a man, I'm like, man, I feel so respected that she's not like, yeah, and now you're in purgatory maritally forever. No. She's like, hey, here's how you can fix it and make it better today. Man, it's so helpful, right? Point to the future with clear, realistic application. I want to give you a personal example, and this is actually really personal, but my parents were so good at this. And I shared before, I was really good high school student. I was a great college student, except for my behavior, which was terrible. But my grades were good in college. And I was a terrible grade school student. Terrible. I had lots of illness and many surgeries and hospitalizations in grade school because I had a life-threatening nerve-related birth defect. And I haven't talked much about this because it's a painful part of my life. But I also had a learning disability called dyslexia, which I still struggle with. And it was hard because my brother was great at everything. And you guys have that where you're like, I mean, you're not that great, and your sibling is like number 1 best. Like that was my life growing up, right? My brother, valedictorian, great at sports, great at, just everything. And what I appreciated about my parents is they were always honest about my life. The Hill family never did false praise. My parents would say, yes, you're not the best in your class. And yes, you do struggle with some things. They'd say, you won't be a mathematician like the rest of your family. And my dad and brother were amazing at mathematics, but I just wasn't. They would say, you won't be great at the same sports that others are. You're not going to be able to play soccer like Enoch can. And it's just not your gig right now. And my parents said, you definitely are not going to be a professional singer. We're just going to come out there. No. But they always pointed to my future with a clear and realistic application. My dad would always tell me, you can do great things, and you are not a victim. And even though illness and learning disability in your life are rough, there are people with less who are doing more. My dad would always say, John, you can do this. The hand that you've dealt is sufficient to accomplish a great purpose with your life. He would always tell me, John, every situation, no matter how bleak and how bad it is, you always have options. You always have options to choose God's plan for your life. You always have a choice. It begins in your head. Dad would say, smart people are not successful. Being smart is not what it takes to be successful. He said, people who try hard, people who are relentless, people who never give up. And then he'd tell me, you are such a hard worker. We love how hard you work. We know that you work harder than anyone else. We've never seen a kid who works as hard as you do. You're not the fastest, but you will try the hardest. And he always told me, he said, you're a hill. He said, you're a hill, and the hills never give up. They knew I couldn't win races, but they could show me simple steps that were future-oriented, that would lead to a better tomorrow. I remember one specific conversation. I was a broken fifth grader. I was sitting in the sunroom of our house in Minnesota, and I was a broken fifth grader. I was brokenhearted, and I was so broken. I remember my dad telling me these things one morning, and he was honest about what I was struggling with. There was no false encouragement, and there was no praise that was unearned in our family. They meant what they said, and they wouldn't say it unless they could. But he told me that he still saw potential for greatness in me. He said, John, yes, like you have failed at many different things, but I believe that if you work hard again, if you try hard again, if you don't give up, if you get up again and you focus on your future. I just remember he focused on my unique calling and skill set. He said, John, you're not gifted like me or your brother at math. You're not a great soccer player like Enoch. But I still remember this because it changed the course of my life. He said, John, you have words. He said, John, you can speak. You have great potential there. You can do great things with words. And I love that he had the honesty to say, you can't do it yet. You have not developed that skill. Words are, intrinsic skill is a gift, but it's a gift that needs to be developed. You can't just be good at it. It doesn't fall from the sky. But he said, I see greatness that is in you if you work hard enough to bring it out. And I'm convinced that it was that very well-placed criticism that pointed me on the road that I'm on today. And he showed me my weakness in a way that allowed me to walk into a better future. He equipped me with the work ethic that needed to get there. And it just clicked in that mind. I remember as a kid just thinking, I have what it takes to do great things with my life in my own unique way. I remember thinking in that moment, I'm a hill, and that means I will work harder and I will work longer. I will bring my best and then some, and I will always go the extra mile. I'm so thankful for my parents who criticized me with right hearts, not for justice, not for competition, which as parents, believe it or not, sometimes we can get into a mode where we compete with our own children, right? But they wanted me to do better, even better than they did, if that's what it took. And the last thing that they did with criticism was by far the most important. I want you to see this. You point to the future with clear, realistic application, but ultimately, you always point to Jesus. When building a shelf, the goal is to build a shelf, right? According to a specific set of directions. And if you try to build the shelf according to a different plan, especially with IKEA furniture, let's be honest, it's just not going to work. You have to do it exactly the way they tell you to, in the right order, or it's not going to work. In life, sometimes I think we forget the end goal. We get partway through the project and we start saying, I'm going to do it my own way. But in the end, success, I think, has pretty narrow boundaries. It's not about how much money you made. It's not about how much fun you had. It's not about how much good you did for the world. At the end of the day, none of those things will matter. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters is you're standing with Jesus. I think so often we try to build a shelf according to our own plans, and Jesus humbly points us to a better life. He says, Jesus' words in John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. This is the one way. I want to ask you, when you look at the directions of life, what are you building towards? What is the ultimate goal? What are you doing with the directions of your life? For some of us, I'll be honest, I don't think we have directions. I think we're just living and trying and making it up as we go. And it's scary, isn't it? For others of us, we're living according to a direction set. When we're really honest, the ultimate goals of our life have nothing to do with God's plan. They all have to do with things that at the end are not going to matter. And Jesus came humbly and lovingly to show us a better way. He came to offer loving criticism. And this is how the passage ends. It says, but the tax collector stood at a distance, and he dared not even lift his eyes to heaven as he prayed. Instead, he beat his chest with sorrow, saying, "Oh God, be merciful to me, for I am a sinner." I tell you, this sinner, not the Pharisee, returned home justified before God. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. I want to ask you today, humbly, what are you building with your life? What is the blueprint that you're using? The Pharisee was building what he thought was a great monument. Oh, I'm a great citizen. I tithe. I do all this stuff. I'm a leader in my church. Look what I have done. Look how much better than other people I am. But his heart was messed up. And even though he was a leader in church, even though he thought he was a follower of Christ, he was not. He was not justified before God. The monument he built at the end of his life would one day end up as ash. He was not a follower of Christ. He was a great guy. But according to God's standard, he fell short. He definitely couldn't give good criticism, because from the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. The tax collector knew he fell short. He went to God and he asked for help. He knew his shelf wasn't perfect. He knew he needed God to rebuild his life into a masterpiece. See, I want you to know Christianity, it doesn't demand that you build a perfect shelf with your life. It is understanding that our greatest efforts will fall short of God's perfect standard. It begins when we humble ourselves and we say, God, my shelf is not what you want it to be. Will you help me rebuild it in your image? Will you, by the power of your Spirit, redeem me, remake me according to your plan and according to your purpose? Being a Christian begins when you say, God, I yield my life to you. Yield means turn over. You become my leader. I am giving it all to you. I'm living according to your plans, your direction set, right? Jesus, will you make me? I know there are some of you here who've been trying to put your life together. You've been trying your best. You've been trying to check off all these boxes, and your shelf sort of looks like this, right? It looks like chaos. It looks a little unfinished. It's not what you hoped it would be. It's not what you wanted it to be. And you know it's not what God demands from you. And you might look good from the outside. You might look good according to everybody, but you know in your heart you fall short of God's perfect standard, because we all do. God wrote that on our hearts. He wrote sin on our hearts. We know that it's there. I want you to know that we have a God who loves you. He's not here to serve justice on you or to compete with you. He loves you and he wants to build you up. And it happens when you step back from the mess of our lives. And you say, Jesus, I need you to fix it. Jesus, I don't want to live according to my direction set. I don't want to live according to my plans anymore. I want to turn it all over to you. I want to yield to you. I'm putting you in charge of the project of my life. Right now, I'd just like to ask heads to bow and eyes to close, just in a moment of thought, privacy, and concentration. I know there are some of you here today, you have been trying to build a life that you think is great, but you realize as you look at it, it's not what God wants it to be, and it's not what you hoped it would be. Today, you can turn that over to Jesus, and you can say, Jesus, I need you to remake me. That's what he came to do. He came by the power of his Spirit at work in our lives to transform you and to build you in his own image, to rebuild you in his image. If that's something that you need right now, could you ask God to do that for you? Would you be willing to just lift up your hand and say, Pastor, yeah, that's me. I want you to rebuild my life. I see hands going up all over. I see lots of hands. I see those hands. I see that hand. I see that hand. I see that hand over there. I see that hand on that side. I see that hand back there too. I just ask you to pray in your heart with me. Lord Jesus, I turn my will and my life over to you. I just confess that I have lived in a way that falls short of your perfect standard and that my shelf is not built according to your plans. I ask you to forgive me, to redeem me, and to rebuild me by the power of your presence and by your Spirit in my life. Today I declare that my life is not my own and that I will never be the same because I've given it all over to you. In Jesus' name, all God's people said, amen.
Amen. Can we give a round of applause for everyone who just made Jesus their leader and forgiver? Yes, that's amazing. Man, I got so much from that message today, and I know you guys did too, but I just want to leave you with a simple application, okay? I know we can all relate to all three of those areas John talked about when it comes to giving constructive criticism. So this week, we just want you to think about what area is it that you struggle with the most, and do a Bible app plan on it. If you struggle with comparison, do a Bible app plan. There's a great one called The Comparison Trap or Without Rival. Check it out. If you struggle with justice, man, that is just a forgiveness issue. Do a Bible app plan on forgiveness. Learn how to forgive like Jesus forgave you. And thirdly, if you struggle with feeling the need to point out people's sin, man, do a Bible app plan on compassion, or maybe it's sharing your faith. But guys, let's not let this week go by without moving with God's Spirit. We need to move. Jesus Christ, He calls us to action. Following Jesus is a choice. Let's follow Him together this week as a church. So right now, we are going to sing again. I invite you to stand and let's worship our God together one last time.